Hmm. The moment my daughter-in-law set that plate in front of me, I knew something had shifted in this house. Not the food itself, though it was cold, leftover pasta from 2 nights before, but the way she did it, without looking at me, without a word, just the soft thud of ceramic on the table. And then she walked back to the kitchen where my son was cutting into his ribeye. I sat there for a moment. Just sat there. I'm 67 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years in Lubbock, Texas. I raised my son, Nathan, mostly alone after his father passed when Nathan was 11. I know what it looks like when someone decides you no longer matter enough to pretend. That was the night I started paying attention. I should back up, because none of this made sense without the 2 years that came before it. Nathan called me in the spring of 2022 and said he and his wife Cassandra were struggling. Not his exact words, he never said anything directly if he could help it. But that was the shape of it. The mortgage was underwater. Her car needed a new transmission. The baby, my granddaughter Lily, was coming in 4 months, and the nursery was still an empty room with a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Mom, we just need a little help getting through this stretch," he said. I was living in my house in Lubbock then, the house I'd owned for 22 years. It was paid off. Small, but mine. My pension came every month. I had enough. I told him yes. Of course I told him yes. What I didn't understand then was that a little help had no bottom. I didn't understand that yet. I would. The first thing was the mortgage. 3 months behind, $6,400 total. I wired it without blinking. Then the car. Then the hospital deposit for the delivery. Then, when Lily was born and Cassandra decided she didn't want to go back to her office job, I started sending $1,200 a month for what Nathan called household expenses. He was working in logistics, making decent money. I didn't ask too many questions about where it was going. I trusted him. He was my son. But after 8 months of that, he called again. This time, his voice had a different texture. Not desperate, more rehearsed. "Mom, we've been thinking. It would make so much more sense if you just moved in with us. You could help with Lily during the day, and it would be easier than the wire transfers every month. We have the space." They had a 4-bedroom house in Garland, outside Dallas. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. What I saw when I imagined my life was this: a quiet house, a small yard, dinners alone. Lily was 4 months old and I had held her exactly once, at the hospital. I missed her already, in a way that surprised me. I sold most of my furniture. I rented out my Lubbock house to a young couple, teachers, both of them, and I moved my things into what Nathan called the guest room. The guest room was at the end of the hall, past the laundry machines. It had one window that faced the neighbor's brick wall. There was no closet, just a metal rack from Target. The ceiling had a water stain shaped roughly like the state of Florida. I set up my things and I told myself it was temporary. The first few months weren't bad. Lily was still small enough that she needed everyone, and when you're needed, you don't stop to notice much. I got up early with her. I sang to her the same songs I'd sung to Nathan 30 years ago. I made her oatmeal when she started solids, and I learned very quickly that Cassandra had opinions about everything. The temperature of the bathwater, whether Lily wore socks indoors, which brand of wipes was acceptable. I adjusted. I'd spent 3 decades adjusting to 22 different 8-year-olds every year. I knew how to make myself smaller in a room. But Cassandra had a way of moving through the house that told me something. She never asked me to leave a room, but she arranged herself so that I felt like I should. She would come into the kitchen while I was cooking and begin reorganizing the cabinet I had just organized. She would sit down at the table where I was reading and open her laptop and put on a podcast without headphones, at a volume just loud enough that reading became impossible. Nathan noticed nothing, or he chose not to. The money continued, not the wire transfers. Now it was different. I had added Cassandra to one of my credit cards when she explained that it was easier for household purchases. I had agreed. It seemed reasonable. I had another card for my own expenses, and I was still depositing $1,200 a month into their joint account. By the end of my first year there, I had spent just under $34,000. I know that number now because I eventually sat down with every statement. But at the time, I wasn't looking closely. I told myself it was an investment in family. I told myself this was what mothers did. I think I told myself a lot of things to avoid seeing what was actually happening. The pasta dinner, the one I started with, happened on a Thursday in November. Nathan's colleague and the colleague's wife had come over, and Cassandra had made a full meal: ribeye steaks, roasted potatoes, a green salad with the good olive oil. The table was set with the cloth napkins she kept in a drawer and only brought out for company. I came to the table and my place was set, but the plate in front of me was different from the others. While everyone else had steak, I had a bowl of leftover pasta, the kind from Tuesday's dinner, with the sauce already dried a little around the edges. Cassandra had already sat down. She was laughing at something the colleague's wife had said. Nathan looked at my plate. Then he looked away. I ate the pasta. I said very little. I watched my son cut his steak and refill his guest's wine glass, and I thought about the $34,000, and I thought about my house in Lubbock with the little yard and the porch where I used to drink coffee in the morning, and I thought about how I had given all of that up to sleep in a room with a Florida-shaped water stain and eat Tuesday's leftover pasta on a Thursday, while my son entertained company. After the guests left, I went to my room. I did not say goodnight. I lay in bed for a long time. I wasn't angry yet. I was something quieter than angry, something that comes before anger, the feeling of recognizing something you've been refusing to see. 2 weeks later, Cassandra knocked on my door. I was folding laundry. She stood in the doorway with her phone in her hand and a look on her face that was almost apologetic but not quite. I wanted to mention, she said, that I have an appointment at the spa on Saturday, the one on Midway Road. It's $280 for the package I want, massage and the facial, and I was going to put it on the household card. Is that okay? I looked at her. The household card, I said. The one you added me to. For household purchases. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened in my chest in that moment. It wasn't a snap. It was more like something finally becoming visible, a shape you'd been walking around in the dark that suddenly had light on it. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded and left. I don't think she doubted for even a second that I would say yes. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I put the folded shirt I was holding on my lap, and I sat there with it. I thought, she is going to charge $280 for a spa day to a credit card I pay. She served me leftover pasta in front of company, and she has not once asked how I am doing, not once in 14 months, unless she needed something. I thought, my son watched that happen and said nothing. And then, and this is the thought that changed everything, I thought, at some point I taught them that this was acceptable. I made it easy to use me. I made it so comfortable that they stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource. That thought was the most painful one. More painful than the pasta, more painful than the spa request. Because if I had taught them this, then I could unteach it. But unteaching something is harder than teaching it. It requires consequences. I didn't sleep much that night. I got up at 4:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone when my feet touched the floor. I dressed quietly. Black slacks, the blue blouse with the buttons I'd had for 15 years, my good walking shoes. I combed my hair in the dark, by touch mostly, the way I used to do when Nathan was a baby and I didn't want to wake him with the light. I took my purse and my folder, a manila folder I'd prepared the night before, while the house was quiet, with printed statements from the past 14 months, and a legal pad where I'd written down everything I needed to do. And I went to the kitchen. I made 1 cup of coffee. I drank it standing at the counter, looking out at the backyard where it was still dark and the neighbor's motion light was casting a thin orange stripe across the grass. Then I got in my car and I drove. The bank opened at 8. I was in the parking lot at 7:40. I had a list. I worked through it methodically the way I used to work through parent-teacher conferences, one family at a time. Nothing skipped. First, I removed Cassandra from the credit card. The customer service representative processed it without comment. I thanked her. Second, I changed the account number for the monthly deposit to Nathan's account. The deposit would still go out that month because it was already scheduled, but after that, nothing. Third, I moved the bulk of my savings to a new account Nathan didn't know about at a different bank across town. I had kept this account from before, an old one from when I was first teaching, barely used. I reactivated it that morning. Fourth, I sat in the parking lot after and I called my sister, Yvonne, in Albuquerque. Yvonne is 3 years older than me, and she is the person who has known me the longest and the best. She answered on the second ring, even though it was not yet 9 in the morning. I need a few days, I said. Can I come? I'll make up the couch, she said. I might need a week. I'll make up the bed in the back, she said. How soon? Tonight, I said. She didn't ask why. She has never needed me to explain myself to her, which is one of the great gifts of a long relationship with someone who loves you. I drove back to the house. Nathan and Cassandra were both still upstairs. I could hear the shower running. Lily was in her crib. I could see her on the monitor in the kitchen, still asleep. I stood in the hallway outside her door for a moment, just stood there. She was 18 months old. She had my son's ears and my late husband's hands, wide palms and short fingers, and she had learned in the last 3 weeks to say the word more with an urgency that made me laugh every time. She would not remember any of this. She would not remember that I sang to her every morning, or that I was the one who figured out she didn't like the texture of mashed peas, but would eat them if they were pureed smooth. She would not remember, but I would. I went to my room and I packed 2 bags, the things I actually needed, my medications, my documents, the small wooden box that had belonged to my mother, 3 changes of clothes, my laptop, the folder. I left the rest. The plastic rack from Target, the extra blankets, the stack of books on the windowsill. I could get them later, or I couldn't. It didn't feel like the most important thing. I wrote a note. Just one. I put it on the kitchen table under the corner of Nathan's coffee mug so it wouldn't slide. Nathan, I have gone to stay with Yvonne for a while. I'll call you in a few days. There are some things we need to talk about. Please know I love you. Mom, I did not write anything to Cassandra. I put my 2 bags in the car. I backed out of the driveway. I drove toward I-30 and then west, toward Albuquerque, watching the Dallas skyline in my rearview mirror until it wasn't there anymore. The drive to Albuquerque is about 10 hours. I stopped twice, once for gas, once for a sandwich I ate in a rest stop parking lot with the windows down and the November air coming in cold and dry and clean. I cried for about 45 minutes somewhere between Abilene and Midland. Not dramatically. Just the kind of crying that happens when you've been holding something for a long time and the pressure finally releases. I let it happen, and then I let it stop, and I kept driving. Yvonne had the porch light on when I got there. She came out to the car before I even had the door open. She is not a woman who makes speeches. She took one of my bags and said, "Are you hungry?" And I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. And she heated up soup, and we sat at her kitchen table until almost midnight, not talking about anything that had happened, just talking the way sisters talk when they are glad to be in the same room. Nathan called the next morning at 7,018. I let it ring. He called again at 7:31. Then a text. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" I texted back, "I'm safe. I'll call you tonight." I waited until 6 o'clock, until Yvonne had gone to her book club, and I was alone in the kitchen with my tea. He answered immediately. "Mom, what happened? I came downstairs and you were just gone." Cassandra said, "Nathan," I said, "I'm going to talk and I need you to listen. Can you do that?" A pause. "Okay." I talked for almost 20 minutes. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 31 years learning how to say difficult things to people who did not want to hear them, and I used everything I knew. I told him about the $34,000 over 14 months. I told him about the credit card, about the spa appointment, about the dinner with the leftover pasta. I told him that I had come to his home because I loved him and wanted to be near my granddaughter, and that somewhere in the 14 months since, I had been reduced to someone who ate cold leftovers at a table she was paying for. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. "Mom," he said. His voice was different, smaller. "I didn't know you were there," I said. "At dinner. You saw my plate." Another silence. "I didn't think about it," he said. "I should have. I didn't think." "No," I said. "You didn't." We talked for another hour. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he got defensive about the money, about Cassandra, and I had to let those moments pass without grabbing onto them. I was not interested in winning an argument. I was interested in being seen. By the end, he was crying. My son, who hadn't cried in front of me since his father's funeral, was crying in his kitchen in Garland while I sat in my sister's kitchen in Albuquerque. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I'm really sorry." "I know," I said. "I'm really sorry." I said, "I believe you, Yvonne, for 11 days. On the 9th day, Nathan drove out alone. Cassandra had not come. That was his choice, he said, not mine, but I was grateful for it. We sat on Yvonne's back porch in the afternoon sun, the two of us, and it felt in some ways like sitting with the 11-year-old boy he had been after his father died, lost in a way he didn't have the vocabulary for, looking at me to understand what came next. "I let her change things," he said. "I let it happen slowly enough that I stopped seeing it." "I know how that works," I said. He looked at me. "How are you not angrier at me?" I thought about it. "I am angry," I said, "but I'm also your mother, and I have been your mother longer than you've been her husband, and I know the difference between someone who's cruel and someone who got lost." "What's the difference?" "Cruel people don't drive 10 hours to sit on a porch." He laughed, a real laugh, small and wet around the edges. We made an agreement that day. I was not going back to the guest room at the end of the hallway. That was finished, but Nathan would talk to Cassandra, and the three of us would need to find a different arrangement, one that treated me as a grandmother who was welcome, not a resource who was convenient. I told him I was calling my renters in Lubbock about my timeline. He nodded. He said he would help me get set up when I was ready, whatever that meant. "And the money?" he said. He looked at his hands. "I want to pay you back." "I know you do," I said. "We'll figure that out later." "That's not why I left." "Why did you leave?" I looked out at Yvonne's yard, the dry grass, the Russian sage along the fence going silver in the fall. "Because staying was teaching you I was worth nothing," I said, "and I'm not willing to teach that." I moved back to Lubbock the following spring. My renters had found another place, and I spent 2 weeks repainting the kitchen myself, a color called pale sage that I'd seen in a magazine and saved the clipping for 3 years. The porch needed new boards on one end, and a neighbor's teenage son did the work for $200 and a plate of the lemon bars I make every Christmas. The first morning I woke up in my own bedroom, in my own house, I made coffee and took it to the porch, even though it was still cold. The sun was just coming up over the rooftops and the street was quiet, except for a dog somewhere walking itself, its nails clicking on the pavement. I sat with the cup in both hands, and I thought about how many mornings I had stood in that house on the edge of Dallas watching the neighbor's motion light and telling myself it was enough. It was not enough. I had known that. I had known that. I had just been afraid to know it all the way. Lily comes to visit now. Nathan brings her every couple of months, just him and her, a road trip they seem to look forward to. She calls me Grammy. She has started insisting on helping me measure the flour when we bake, which means flour on the counter and on her shirt, and once spectacularly on the dog that has since learned to leave the kitchen during baking. Cassandra and I are not close. I don't imagine we will be, but she has not been unkind in the ways that matter. And Nathan seems to be paying attention in a way he wasn't before. I don't think one conversation changes a person. I don't think one crisis does either. I think what changes people is the moment they realize there will be consequences. Real ones, not just disappointment, not just a cold shoulder, but actual consequences that altered the shape of their life. That was what the Dawn Drive did. Not punish them, not punish myself, just change the shape of things. I have thought about what I would say to another woman in the situation I was in. Another woman my age who has been giving and giving until she forgot that giving was supposed to be a choice and not just a condition of being allowed to stay. I would say, the people who love you will still love you when you ask for something in return. And the ones who don't, who pull away the moment you stop being useful. That is the only answer you will ever need about what you were to them. I was not willing to be an answer to that question. I am 67 years old. I have 31 years of third graders who can now vote, most of them. I have a sister who answers the phone on the second ring. I have a granddaughter who puts too much flour in the bowl and laughs about it. I have a porch and a morning, and a cup of coffee I made for myself. That is not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all. I have thought about that drive many times since. The way the highway was empty at 5 in the morning, the way the heater in my car made a soft ticking sound for the first few minutes before the engine warmed up, the way I had my folder on the passenger seat and my hands were steady on the wheel. People ask, not out loud, but I can see it, how a person lets something go on that long. 14 months. $34,000. A room at the end of a hallway with no closet and a water stain on the ceiling. How does a person keep waking up in that room and telling herself it's fine? I don't have a complicated answer. I think we accept what we accept because the cost of seeing clearly feels higher than the cost of not seeing. As long as I told myself I was helping, I didn't have to sit with the harder truth that I had handed my dignity over so gradually I hadn't noticed it leaving. That's not weakness exactly. But it's not wisdom either. What Nathan and Cassandra did was wrong. I want to say that plainly, without softening it. Using someone's love as a financial arrangement, letting a woman sleep in a storage room while she funds your mortgage, that is a failure of character. The spa appointment, the leftover pasta, the credit card added for household purchases, none of that happened by accident. It happened because I made it easy and because they let themselves stop asking whether easy was the same thing as right. But here's what I know about consequences. Having lived 67 years and watched them work their patient way through every situation I've ever seen, they are not punishment. They are just reality, arriving on its own schedule. I did not drive to that bank to hurt Nathan. I drove because staying had become a form of lying. Lying to him about what was acceptable and lying to myself about what I was worth. The morning I left, I made a choice to be honest in the only language that had gotten through, not words. I had used words for 14 months. Actions, the kind that changed the shape of things. And here is the part that still surprises me. It worked. Not immediately, not without pain. But Nathan drove 10 hours to sit on a porch with me and say he was sorry. That does not happen when someone is not capable of growth. It happens when someone has been forced, finally, to see what they have been choosing not to see. I think about the third graders I taught for 31 years. The ones who acted out, the ones who grabbed and took and pushed. They were not bad children. They were children who had not yet learned that other people were as real as they were. That is what school is partly for. That is what consequences are for. Nathan was not a bad son. He was a grown man who had stopped seeing me as fully real, as someone with needs and limits and a right to take up space. My leaving made me real again. That is the only way I know to say it. I am back in my house in Lubbock now. I painted the kitchen pale sage. Lily comes and puts too much flour in the bowl and laughs. I drink my coffee on the porch in the morning. I earned this quiet, not because I suffered for it, but because I finally decided I was worth it. Those are not the same thing, and knowing the difference, that is what I want anyone to take from this. if they take anything at all. You do not have to earn the right to be treated with dignity. You just have to stop accepting the alternative.